Hello, welcome to Radio Row in Los Angeles at Super Bowl 56. For Caleb Radham, I'm and myself, Roy Kessel. We're here with Sports Philanthropy Network all week, and we're very excited to have with us Nicole Roberts. Nicole has been working long, many years, dealing with concussions, helping people through, and putting together with Lee Steinberg the Brain Health Summit. She's also done amazing work in human rights areas and food. And Nicole, we're very excited to have you on the show.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
Um, let's start with the immediate event at hand with the Brain Health Summit coming up on Saturday, day before Super Bowl 56. Give us a little bit of background of how you got involved with Lee putting that together.
Well, you talked to Lee Steinberg yesterday. Yeah. So I met Lee many years ago. In fact, I know it's over a decade because we're on our 9th annual event this year. And when I met Lee, we talked a lot about the brain. My background's in neuroscience, and I was actually shocked at how much he knew about the field of neuroscience and brain injury and concussion. And he said, I'd really love to reignite these sort of discussions I used to have. And he mentioned his Super Bowl party. And he said, wouldn't it be nice if we could get these things going again? And then just out of pure kindness and passion, he offered up an hour of his annual, Steinberg Super Bowl party to talk about anything we really wanted in the brain space. So we called it the Brain Health Summit. And that means every year we can morph the topics a little to the host city. This year, of course, we're going to lean into Hollywood and LA. And one of the things we're going to be discussing on stage with our panel, we've got a producer, her name's Kishori Rajan from Viva Mod. We're talking about the storytelling, the role that storytelling can play in how we talk about mental health, what we deem as acceptable, how we destigmatize things. And, of course, we'll mention Jerry Maguire, we'll mention the movie Concussion. I can tell you, having hosted these for 9 years now, the first few people were interested. But, when you approach a sport like football and you say, let's talk about brain injury, people just sort of scatter, right? They don't really want to talk about it. And then that movie came out, and that next Super Bowl, when I did Radio Row, same as always, the conversations were so much richer and deeper. And it was about, these are people. The whole person we have to take care of. We have to think about the long-term implications. What can we do better? And that, I think, is what's so important, is to really set those conversations up. If they don't happen, we won't do better, but we can. And it's in the best interest of everyone, the league, the players, the agents, the fans. And so Lee's given us that platform. And so Saturday at Sony Studios will be the 9th annual Brain Health Summit. This year's theme is how to build a resilient brain. And so in addition to the Hollywood angle, we have the coolest technologies. We actually have a lounge, an entire brain lounge. And UC Irvine is bringing 3 brains. So if you're at Sony on Saturday, you can actually play with brains. We've got all these cool technologies, virtual reality, HatBee, Here Now, Help, A7FL. I mean, just incredible sponsors. And all the people in attendance, they can have good food, good drinks, and then interact with all this fun technology to improve their own mental health and wellness.
So, Nicole, I got to ask you, you are one of the most fascinating people I know, okay? Because you're not just into brain health. You're into policy. You're into the exploitation of women and children and those at risk. You have your hands in a lot of pots, but you are truly committed to excellence in every one of your endeavors. So, first of all, thank you for creating hope and possibility, number one. But number two, I want to give you just a moment, if you don't mind, to sort of share with our audience where this passion started. Where did it come from? And why are you so committed to these causes?
It's a good question. And thank you for the compliment. It actually feels like, when you do a lot, like it feels like you don't do anything excellent. You just sort of get things done. I've always wanted to help people. I think I knew at a very young age I would be a doctor of some kind. I didn't know what that would look like. My doctorate's in public health. And so I think that's part of it right there, is public health is so broad. That can be transportation, it can be food, it can be housing. And so, for me, food has become really my area of focus. The difference you can see in a child in particular who's undernourished or malnourished, and that includes the United States. A lot of people think it's, a problem somewhere else. There are so many undernourished kids in the United States. Even the food they do get doesn't have the nutrients they need to grow and develop properly. And that is not just physically, but also mentally and emotionally. The attachment that children develop with food is remarkable. And we see changes in behavior when you live in a house that's food insecure. And so for us to build, good people, it starts when they're small. It starts with what we feed them, what they hear, what they see, all those things. And so, when it comes to public health issues, I think there's no shortage of things to be passionate about because they're human rights issues, they're people issues. And I'm really, really lucky, in this particular case, we're on sport philanthropy, right? Like the ability to use sport for good, I don't think I can underscore enough. And actually meeting Lee Steinberg, I had no clue what you could do with a platform like sport. And I don't just mean, the athletes themselves out being role models, but what teams can do, the impact they have on their communities. It is absolutely remarkable. I don't think there's actually a better form of diplomacy in the world than sport. Children don't even have to speak the same language to play, and they can learn so much. And you can distribute food, you can teach all kinds of skills. It's just incredible. So I've been really blessed to be given, the Super Bowl to talk about helping people. What is there not to be passionate about?
So, Nicole, you're passionate about a lot of different issues. Obviously, the Super Bowl is a great setting to talk about concussions due to the nature of the game. Great focus there with your background on neuroscience. Talk about some of the other areas. Where did that passion come from relating to food, relating to human rights?
I think on the human rights front, honestly, it mostly started, like I said, when I was very young. I had a bit of an unconventional childhood, I think. And because of that, I think I was exposed to a lot of scenarios that certainly other children in my school weren't exposed to. I was always a little bit different. And yet I had a family that was so fantastic. They always made sure we were, fed and loved, nourished in all the ways that a child should be. But I think I always had this awareness that there's so much more than, just sort of ticking off the boxes of what you're supposed to do. And then I think, again, in school, even when I was an undergrad, I was psychology and biology. I wanted I guess at the core, my real drive is understanding people. I just always wanted to understand people. And once you do that, for example, Kayla earlier.
Is that possible to understand people?
Yeah,
Can we get that all figured out?
If the pandemic's taught me anything, no. Uh, People are a conundrum. But they're very predictable, actually. I would argue, if you look at the millennia of human behavior, we reacted to pandemics and plagues, hundreds of years ago, identically to how we responded now. Like, it's actually very predictable, and so is everything else. Then, so Kayla mentioned public policy. I live in Washington, D.C., and, you're able in a place like that. Some days you feel like you can't accomplish anything, but other days you really feel like you can affect change. And public health, as I said earlier, it can be transportation, it can be housing, it's where people live, it's what they eat, it's what they do. And so when it comes to understanding people, if you understand how they behave and what they're really interested in, you can build policy that affects real people, not just some silly, everyone should do X or Y. That's never going to work. It has never worked in the history of humans. It will never work. In sport, talking about Brain Health Summit, that's a great, example that sport has always been violent. We're humans. We like violence. We like big collisions, right? We also used to be gladiators. We used to joust. We used to do things that we no longer do. And so sport evolves, it changes. It's based on, where we are in society and culture. It's based on what we know. And so I think some people who are really resistant to having conversations about things like brain injury and concussion, they just assume you don't want football. Well, I can tell you, Lee Steinberg wants football. Right? He wants football. We want football.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm going to unmute myself to publicly declare I want football.
You want football. I want football. But we can also make small changes that make it safer. We can institute things that that let us know these guys are going to be happy, whole, healthy people when they're older, right? And a lot of that gets to the policy level of things. How do we treat them? From the day they start playing Mighty Mites to retirement. What does that look like? How do we do things differently? And those conversations shouldn't be scary. They shouldn't be scary at all. We have them in any other arena. Why not this one?
And I think that's really important. You talk about changes, incremental changes that don't necessarily obliterate the sport completely. Right? We were out at the Pro Bowl and watching them play the Pro Bowl with some form that wasn't even one-handed touch. They might as well. I would have much rather see them play flag football. You understand why the guys don't want to get hit more than they need to. You understand why there's flag football for kids up to ages 14. Those all make a lot of sense. You're taking thousands and thousands of kids out of people's lives.
Yeah, but Roy, it's like this. We saw Patrick Mahomes there. Lee is Patrick's agent.
Yeah, Patrick's great.
The business of sport is still business. Lee doesn't want Patrick getting hurt. Patrick doesn't want to get hurt. It's a Pro Bowl game. Was it like watching the Harlem Globetrotters play basketball? A little bit. But the whole purpose of using sport for good also means having healthy athletes who are able to contribute back to their communities.
Yes, and that is something I think is so important. And earlier I said mentally, but also emotionally. Those things all go together. If you want a whole person, it's not just how fast can they run and jump. You also need a person who thinks in real time, who understands everything happening around them, who is an integral part of their community, right? All these things are important. It's so much more than just some of the data we put on the physical attributes. And you mentioned Patrick. Patrick's such a wonderful example that when the Steinberg team signed Patrick, there was a nonprofit immediately involved that he cares about, his family cares about. There was, what can we do for the city of Kansas City? Like how do we integrate wholly into this city? That's how you build a fan base. That's how you keep one. That's how you keep a player healthy and happy and engaged. He wants to stay in that city. He wants to lead that team. It's so much more than just showing up and running the ball. And I think that is a perspective that's really growing in all facets of life. But I think in sport in particular, we're really starting to see these are not commodities you buy, sell, and trade. These are people. And to have the best person on the field, you need to ensure that you're working with the best person, and that encompasses so many things.
So Nicole, I have to ask. So I've had 8 concussions, which is pretty uncommon for a girl, right? But I've had 8. I feel like I resonate with a lot of the athletes who struggle to put their words together, to be very careful in conversations that I'm using the correct words. My balance is a little bit off. My sense of space and time is a little wonky. I feel like I can relate to athletes in so many ways. That affects your confidence. It affects the way that you feel about yourself, your ability to engage with the people around you, to live a fulfilling life. So you're in this space, Nicole. To anybody who's watching, who has a loved one who has had multiple concussions, or someone who's had concussions, what advice can you give at a professional level to sort of navigate on the daily?
First of all, be patient. When something like a helmet is wonderful, it protects your brain or your skull from breaking. That's a very good thing, right? But what makes brain injury so difficult is it's not like other injuries where you can see a broken bone, you get a cast, you have stitches. When there's a concussion or brain trauma, your brain just rattles around inside, right? It can be bruised, it can be harmed. It can take a while. It really can. And it's not just, oh, go stay in a dark room for a couple days and everything will be fine. As you alluded to, I mean, there can be driving issues, there can be thought issues. Every person is different. Vertigo happens for a lot of people. Like, there are just changes that happen, and it's like any other injury. It takes time and patience for it to heal. The other thing I would say is that have a lot of hope, because there are, especially today, and this is one of the reasons I'm so excited, we've got the Brain Lounge this year. There are so many technologies and educated physicians and doctors and clinicians who are able to help in the process. It is not where we used to be, where people literally said for the next 3 days, lay in a dark room. Those days are gone. There are now apps, there's virtual reality, which may sound kind of silly, but they're brain exercises, and there are ways to ease people into situations as opposed to the stark contrast that can sometimes happen and sort of reoccur these things. There's so much happening in the field of neuroscience right now. And if you can find a good doctor, a good clinic, the amount of resources available are really inspiring. Get the resources, but that means, again, you've got to have those honest conversations. If there's personality change, if there's trauma, if there's post-traumatic stress, you can't address something if you don't actually address it. So, have those conversations, and then find the resources in your community or in your state and use them. They work.
Nicole, I want to go back to what you said for a minute, because for many, many years, the standard was full physical and cognitive rest after a concussion. Essentially, no screens, no computers, no exercise, lie down. Don't sleep too much, but lie down and don't be active, right? So with all of this progress now, for parents that are at home watching this, whose kids may have experienced a concussion, what's the current state? What's the best recommendations for that first week?
So I can't give recommendations for the first week because, one, I'm not a clinician in this space. So I can tell you what I'm told regularly, but I'm a doctor of public health, so I don't want to speak in a different physician's lane. I think what's most important that first week, whatever we're talking about in the spectrum, is how comfortable the person is and not to push too hard. And where that can get really difficult on the athlete side is, of course, they want to go back to practice. They have games to play and they have metrics they have to hit to succeed. Military, same way, right? A lot of these personalities inherently want to get back on the field. The one I would say to be most cautious about is children. Return to learn can do damage, right? Children, their brain isn't fully formed until they're in their 20s anyway. When there's been a trauma, particularly a head trauma, pushing too fast can be harmful. So when it comes to getting homework done, attending class, that's the area I would say find a physician, find a doctor, and get a very personalized plan for that first week and the weeks after, because that first week for a child really matters. You don't want to be winging it. You want feedback, and the feedback will change, right? They may respond really well to one thing. They may absolutely shut down at something else. And so you'll have to keep tweaking that sort of diagnosis and that treatment plan.
I think what's really challenging in that environment is brain injuries are invisible, right? Yes. A kid breaks an arm or a leg, they show up with a cast. Everybody's like, oh, poor kid, let's sign your cast. You get a lot of love and attention.
Yep.
You have a brain injury, you get a response from the teacher and your classmates of, what the heck's wrong with you?
Yep.
Why aren't you focused? Why aren't you doing your homework? What can we do to work with the educators and create an environment that gets them the message or allows space for the kids and the families where there is a concussion? child without putting them out on an island.
Yeah, I think what we're doing right now is honestly a big part. And in each little conversation may not feel like we're doing a whole lot, but because, as you said, it's an invisible injury, which means you can't show it. So if you've lost that medium of visual, well, you're left with other mediums. We can talk about it. We can educate to the best of our ability through other senses. But I think education is the best thing that we can do. So whether it's a teacher, a gym teacher, a coach, a principal, whatever it is, the more they know, the better we'll all be. It's something parents in particular should take very seriously. That's not to be fear-mongering, right? I mean, it's like anything else. If your child was going to be a pitcher and they tore their shoulder at 10 or 12, you would be very, very careful about the treatment plan you assign to them. You'd be very intentional about building them back where they should be. We have to do the exact same thing here. We just can't see it, so it's much harder. And oftentimes, as I said a moment ago, you've got to let the child sort of drive, honestly, what they're comfortable with, what they're not, what feels good, what doesn't. And you've got to listen to that because they're giving you feedback.
Nicole, I look forward to seeing you at the Brain Health Summit. We'll close with the information about that. But before we do, if people want to follow you on social media, what do you use? Instagram, Twitter? All right. Where can people find you, Nicole?
Yeah, well, you've got two different names there. So Mary. So Instagram is Nicole.f.roberts. Roberts. Instagram. And Twitter, it's my old name. It's NIC Nick_Fisher.
All right. So if I got those right, for anybody who will be listening to the podcast, missing the live stream, on Instagram that's Nicole.f.roberts, and on Twitter NIC Nick_Fisher, FISHER. Nicole, if people want to attend the Brain Health Summit or learn more about that, where should they go?
Well, if you want to attend, you'll have to reach out to me personally. We sold out last weekend, right? Happy dance. This is the first year, 9 in. There are so many people that want to talk about this that we sold out the Brain Summit at Sony Studios. But you can also watch a live stream. I have a podcast called the Global Good Podcast, and our YouTube channel will be doing a live stream of the panel. So people can log in at noon Pacific time on Saturday. And yeah, perfect. The Global Good Podcast. And there'll be a live feed there so people can subscribe and watch and submit questions. And I will do my best to check those questions while we're on stage so we can be answering them. And we've got a fantastic panel from retired players to neuroscientists and clinicians to, as I said, even a producer from Hollywood talking about how do we communicate these things and tell stories?
Well, Nicole, thank you so much for joining us today. We need more people like you bringing that energy and passion not only to the concussion space, human rights area, food insecurity. You really set an incredible benchmark of leadership in this area.
Thank you.
Your passion comes through in all the work you do with Lee. As you said, Lee was one of the pioneers of getting his athletes involved in the community and foundations way before it was fashionable with the agent community. And so we thank you for sharing your story and sharing your passion with us today.
Thank you. You have a better partner, and thank you guys for putting sport and philanthropy together. It's so necessary.
Thank you, Nicole. My name is Kayla Bradham, here with Nicole Fisher and Roy Kessel, reminding you to live generously.